Bienvenidos al sexto episodio de Librísimo. Antes de nada, os animo a que os suscribáis al canal, que dejéis vuestros me gusta y vuestros comentarios. Hoy nos visita Sarena Ulibarri. Sarena es una autora y editora norteamericana de ficción especulativa cuyos relatos han aparecido en publicaciones como Lightspeed, DreamForge, GigaNotoSaurus o Solarpunk Magazine, entre otras. Y sus ensayos se han publicado en Strange Horizons y Grist. En 2023 publicó dos novelas cortas, Otra Vida, que es la obra de la que vamos a hablar, publicada por Crononauta con traducción de Laura Moreda Caballero, y Still Tree. Como antóloga ha organizado y publicado varios volúmenes internacionales de ficción climática optimista. Glass and Gardens Solarpunk Summers, Glass and Gardens Solarpunk Winters y Multispecies Cities Solarpunk Urban Futures. Os invito a disfrutar de nuestra charla, que será en inglés con subtítulos en español, para conocerla mejor. So here we are in another Librisimo, this time with Sarena Ulibarri. Thank you, Sarena, for being with us.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
It's great to have the opportunity to have you in this space. As you know, we talk about new releases in Spanish, and it caught our attention, your latest novel in Spanish, which is Another Life, Otra Vida, that just got published with Crononauta, with the translation, I always mention the translator, Laura Moreda Caballero. And the first thing we ask everybody who comes to Librisimo is, why the title?
Why the title, Another Life?
Yes.
So it's a story about reincarnation. So the main character learns through this new technology. People are using this new technology to find out who they were in a previous lifetime. And my main character does this test and finds out she was a very terrible person in her past life. And now she's a very beloved person in her community. And so that's the sort of conflict. So Another Life comes from that idea of reincarnation, but also it's a story about climate change and about climate adaptation and about other ways that we can live. And so the characters live in this sort of eco-village, and they're outside of capitalism, they're outside of the sort of mainstream ways of living. And so in a way they have, another life, a different way of living as well. So it's those two concepts that work together to make it Another Life.
We're going to talk about a little bit the genre in which this book, we can say, it's framed in, and many of the implications, because it's really interesting how much you talk about our current society through this city that you imagine in the Death Valley, from all places. I had to say that when I was reading it, because I live in the desert myself, I live in the United Arab Emirates, I could relate, with the distance, of course, I could relate to many of the issues that they face due to the hostile climate. But we will talk about a little bit about that later. I wanted to ask you about this particular story. Do you remember when and where were you when you first had the idea to write this story?
I do. This story came from two separate ideas that sort of combined. So the first was that I learned about the Qattara Depression in Egypt, which is a desert area that's below sea level, and there's an idea to sort of blast a channel from the Mediterranean Sea and feed seawater into the depression. Apparently, this is a very old idea that they've been playing with for close to a century, but I came across it as a potential solution for rising sea levels. Like, could we move some of the rising sea levels down into this desert depression? And I think the general consensus is no, that's not a great idea. But it was an interesting idea to me as a writer, and I kind of wanted to explore that. But I don't know anything about modern Egypt. I didn't feel qualified to write characters in that setting. But Death Valley, California is also a desert area that is below sea level. And, the southwestern United States is also facing both rising sea levels and drought. And so I just kind of played with that idea of how could we move some of the water that we don't need and make it water that we do need. So that was one idea, and that's that the characters come up with this system to move water across the desert into this area. So that was one idea. The other idea was learning that a very terrible human being who is currently alive was born the same year as a very terrible human being from the past died. And so if you believe in reincarnation, this could be literally the same person. And I'm not going to name any names, but you might be able to guess who I'm talking about. And so that I was fascinated by that idea too. But for story purposes, I thought it was a little too easy to just go from villain to villain. Wouldn't it be more interesting if a villain from the past was somebody who was beloved in the present or the future? And because that just complicates things a little bit more, and it raises the question of redemption. Like, if somebody does good deeds or has positive effect in one lifetime, does that balance or negate all the negative that they've done before? And also just how do you reconcile that as the person who learns this and also as the community around them? It just raised really interesting story questions. So I put these two ideas together. I made that the setting, the Death Valley setting in this artificial lake, and then I put this character who had just learned this really devastating information about herself as the sort of leader of the community who created this setting.
And when you read the story, and you realize the main protagonist, Galatia, and she is, as you mentioned, somehow like a leader, even though sometimes she doubts herself as a leader because it goes kind of against the rules, the unwritten rules of the community, where there is no need supposedly there's no need, and they don't really want to replicate the mistakes from society, and they want to be a community where they self-regulate themselves. But she's a mediator, so she's the person who will mediate if there's a problem that's not being resolved in many, many issues. So that's the character that we encountered in the beginning, and we go through the story with her. We accompany her and the different things that happen to her. And then we see this community in another light, which is the name of the city. And I wanted to ask you about your interest in climate change and in solarpunk. I think in Spain, we're not very familiar with solarpunk yet. We have heard a little bit about this wave of science fiction and speculative fiction talking about sustainable ways to imagine the future or our present, or even thinking about the past, but a different way. And I would like you to, for somebody who hasn't heard about solarpunk, for example, how would you kind of describe it?
Solarpunk is science fiction about sustainability, and especially science fiction about sustainability that focuses on grassroots solutions. So rather than top-down corporate approaches, waiting for the government to make the right decisions or waiting for corporations to take charge, these are presenting grassroots solutions, community-led solutions, people who are fed up and just decide to take charge of their world for themselves. And so Solarpunk is a movement that includes writing, it includes science fiction, art, activism, all kinds of things that these are all people working together to envision a better future and envision a future that we can move toward. So it takes a lot of technologies and ideas that already exist and that people are already implementing and just sort of tracks them into the future. What if we did more of this? What if we employed more renewable energies? What if we gave less power to the corporations, more power to the people? What does that future look like? And the stories often take place in the struggle along that path. We don't necessarily tell many stories in the ideal utopia that this creates, because an ideal utopia doesn't really exist and it doesn't make for good storytelling. But the struggle to get to utopia, I think, is really compelling, and it can, in theory, it can inspire action in real life as well. And so we, as Solarpunks, we don't want this to be purely fiction. We want it to be something that inspires people to take action and to have hope in a world that is constantly trying to take those things from us.
I have to say that doesn't mean that the stories within Solarpunk are everything it's flower power. There is problems,
Right.
there is conflicts. So it's not just, I wouldn't say it's just optimistic because everything is great. On the contrary, there's a lot of problems, but the way, in this case, you and other authors approach those problems and how you portray society in an alternative way. Let's talk about this society in another life. So we mentioned that there is this mediator, which is Galatia, is the main protagonist, and then we met a lot of different citizens in this village. I would say, I don't know if it's a town, a village.
I envision it as around 2,000 or 3,000 people,
Okay.
and so yeah, a town or village is fine.
And then we meet also people who want to become part of it, and they're kind of like in a trial period, and then the people from the outside too. So I wanted to know in order to imagine this town and how the society was structured. Did you take from anarchist ideas or more communitarian, or what did you take and why to create One Life?
Sure. The main inspiration, I think, was some anarchist writing by Peter Kropotkin, who was a Russian anarchist writer, anarcho-communism, specifically The Conquest of Bread. So I read The Conquest of Bread in about 2016, 2017. So here in the United States, we'd just gone through a very terrible election, and I had been a supporter of Bernie Sanders, who was, the more progressive candidate. And so I had all these ideas. I had his vision for what, the country could be, what the world could be, in my head, and it had just been, devastated by, by who actually won. But I picked up The Conquest of Bread, and it was Bernie Sanders ideas, but more, it was just even more extreme and more radical. And I just, it resonated so strongly with me. And I just had this sense of like, this is what they've taken from us. This is what the world could be. And of course, it's not a perfect vision. It was written a long time ago. It wouldn't be able to be applied to the modern world, exactly. But still, the ideas in that really resonated with me. And so that was the foundation for Otra Vida. And I added in things from Murray Bookchin's social ecology, and then just a lot of the solarpunk ideas, which come from a lot of these sources, but also are just things that people are coming up with and generating and borrowing from the hippie movement or from environmentalism or from indigenous lifeways and just kind of combining all of these different ways that we can live, different ways we can interact with other humans, different ways we can interact with other species, and just kind of putting that all together into a thought experiment of what would a town like this look like? What would it require to keep it going? And what are the problems that would try to, what are the things that might tear it down as well?
I liked especially that you portray a city in which people collaborate instead of compete. And I thought that was quite refreshing because it takes you away from the dystopias we've been seeing lately everywhere. And it was a very fresh look into society and how society could become if we wanted, if we put our minds into it. I wanted to ask you about the Galatia, the main character, because she is somehow atypical in the sense that maybe now it's not so atypical, but for a long time, main characters were always young, beautiful, male, and this is a woman in probably her 50s or late 40s, something like that. So it's not maybe the typical character that we see as the main character. And I would like to know why you decided that she was going to be this person.
That's a good question. So I have kind of two timelines in the story. I have her when she's young and they're just starting to build Otra Vida, and she's kind of a fiery revolutionary, and she's leading protests and things like that. But the main story takes place when she's as you said, in her 40s, and she's sort of being challenged by a new 20-year-old fiery kid who thinks that they know the way that things should be. And so while I'm dealing with the theme of reincarnation in the past and how it influences the future and how these things feed into each other, I sort of amplified that theme with a generational conflict as well. So we have the 20-year-old versus the 40-year-old, the generational gap, that they sort of want the same thing. They both want this society to be sustainable and beneficial for everybody, but they have different approaches for how they do that. And so that generational conflict just feeds into the larger theme of the past and the future. Um, and and as you said, there's not very many protagonists who are sort of middle-aged women,
Yeah.
and middle-aged women are amazing and have such life experience and such wisdom, and yet are not perfect. And so I just thought it was an interesting approach uh, to protagonists. We don't always have to be at the beginning of things. We can be in the middle of things or at the end of things. So she's very much in the middle of her life and of her conflict.
And maybe a new beginning for her in
Absolutely. It's always, yeah.
a new. And I would like to know, this is more technical question about how you choose the names of the places and the characters. Do you have a specific approach to it? Do you write everything about your characters, even things that we are not going to see in the story, but you wanted to know them so you can understand them better, or just go along and as they come into the story, you just portray what you think it's necessary?
Yeah, I tend to have just a vague idea of a character in the beginning, and I might sketch out a few things, and then I start to write, and the character really comes to life. And at some point, I may have to stop and do a more thorough character sketch. I don't remember if I did that with this book, but I do have to do that sometimes, where I'll stop and pull out and say, who is this person? What do they want? Where do they come from? And and try to figure out who they are in that way. Um, Galacia, I don't know where that name came from. It's not even a real name. And I have no idea, but that's always been her name. That came to me kind of along with the idea for the character. Um, and then Thomas Ramsey, I mean Thomas is a very common name, and I think that Ramsey. I was watching Game of Thrones while I was
Okay.
that, and Ramsey Bolton is a very terrible character there. So I think I didn't intentionally choose that. I think subconsciously I
Mm,
was just like, what is the name for a terrible person? Obviously, it's Ramsey.
mm,
So I think that was influenced by Game of Thrones.
mm,
Um, Tanner, the 20-year-old character,
mhm.
his name changed like three times, and his character changed too as I wrote. So I think when I found the name was when I really found who he was,
Mm.
and often that's the case too. Like if the character is not quite solidified, sometimes it's that the name isn't quite right, and when you get the right name, then they come to life a little more sometimes.
It sounds like you almost think, in your case at least, that the name is an anchor for the character somehow.
Oftentimes, yes,
Mm.
yeah. And yeah, and I will change the names, but yeah, like I
Mm.
said, when you get the right one, it just
Yeah.
seems like that's the touch point to sort of channel who they
Mhm.
really are.
And is there any scene or image or fragment that was that you can say it's key without?
Um, yeah, maybe the image of in the protest
Mm,
scene
yeah.
when so I have these police officers that are called protectors. They've been sort of rebranded and they're supposed to be more friendly and serving the people better, but
Mm.
it's maybe not so much.
They're
And so they're
scary. The way you
yeah, they're
portray
terrifying,
them
right?
with this certain, almost like a mask in their helmet. It's kind of,
Right.
I thought it was really interesting because they're supposed to be almost like an icon of somebody very happy or friendly. And they terrified me when I was reading it.
Yeah, no, it's a very dystopian image. So
Yes.
yeah, it's like a mask with a digital face on it, and it's like a smiling digital face. It's horrifying. And these are the people that are guarding a
Yeah.
uh, uh, basically like a Costco or a super
Yeah.
Walmart or something like a large department store that's been shut down and that people are trying to get the resources from. And so they're guarding this symbol of corporation with guns pointed at people.
Mm.
And so yeah, I think one of the really compelling images for me is that mask, and
Yeah.
then Glacier just walking straight up to them and telling them you have a choice right
Mm.
now of what how this is going to go.
And I think it's a very interesting thing it's like an interesting game that you play because the people who are supposed to protect the citizens, you don't see their faces. So they're faceless. That makes them scary. And the scary, even more scary part is that what you see is like as you said, an electronic smile or that just does has nothing to do with their attitude. So it's even double scary. And I thought that was
Hmm.
ingenious because I don't know if you wanted to be to people who's reading it to get scared, but you could see that if the protectors of the society were that, the rest of that society, you don't go into details about the rest of the world, but what you can imply is really scary. I don't know if that was intentional.
Well, it is sort of a dystopian world that, these characters carve out their
Mm,
little utopian, corner of it. Which again is not a perfect utopia, but yeah, that's why they're retreating into the desert and living in a different way because, things are not great on the outside.
mhm,
And it's also science fiction is always taking what's happening now and projecting it into the future
mm,
in a way that brings attention to the way things are happening now. And
mm.
so yeah, police brutality
Yeah.
is a major issue
Mm,
and something that it's sort of constantly in the news and on our minds, here in the United States and as well as other places. And so yeah, I was just kind of drawing attention to that fact that the people that are supposed to be protecting us are often the ones that are doing the harm.
And talking about the process of writing another life, what was the biggest challenge when you were writing it, and what was the easiest part, if there was? Or maybe there wasn't. I don't know.
I did a lot of revisions on this. So it was originally much longer, and then I cut it down. And you would think that cutting it down would be the hardest part, but it actually was not. I had written it, I had queried it to agents. I got a lot of close but not quites, or like, we like this but don't know how to market or things like that. And so I had put it aside for a couple of years. And then when Stelliform Press, the original publisher, or the Canadian publisher, opened for submissions, I thought this is kind of perfect for them. This is just what they say they're looking for. And so I pulled it out and I looked at it and I realized why it had not been accepted in the first place. There were some plot lines that didn't need to be there. There were things that were there just to make it longer, just to pad it out. And so I took a metaphorical machete and just kind of hacked a bunch of scenes and slimmed it down and just decided thought about what is the core story that I'm trying to tell, and I left out everything else. So really that was kind of an easy part, to just like get rid of everything that didn't need to be there, like a sculpture. But there was one scene that I really wanted to include, but it would have required a whole bunch of additional scenes to support it, and it would have put it over the word count that Stelliform Press was looking for. And so so the hard part was letting go of that one particular scene. And it was it was a scene in which Galatia goes to a holiday with the Jewish community of Otra Vida. And it's a holiday called Purim, which is about reconciling good and evil, and it just again, it like really fed into the theme. And it's I have Jewish heritage and I wanted to represent that in the book, and it was a scene I wanted to, but in the end I decided it's not a load-bearing wall. It could be removed without impacting the story, so it had to go. So cutting down a lot of the scenes was easy. Cutting that one scene was probably the hardest.
Yeah, I can see that. And the end. So how did you get there? Did you know when you started to write the story that the end was going to be like this, or it changed?
The very end was there from the beginning.
Okay.
And it mirrors the beginning. It mirrors the opening scene. And I think the final line was... the final line never changed. Like a lot of other things changed as I revised the book, but that final line was always there. So the very final scene, it changed only in the sense that I had to, that the characters changed a little bit. I had to make sure that they were saying the things that they would be saying. But yeah, that scene was always the same. The climax and the way that we get to that very final scene, that changed a lot. And even after it was accepted by Stelliform Press, we did substantial revisions on the climax scene, and it took a long time to get that right. The editor really helped a lot with that.
I think many other authors that came to LIBRISIMO from the English-speaking circuit, like Adrian Tchaikovsky or Lisa Todol, they were mentioning many different versions, changing, working together with the editors to improve it. And your words kind of like go towards that idea that it's okay to let go things and to work as a partner with your editor. It doesn't mean you're less of an author or a worse author. So I thank you for sharing this with us, because I think it's very interesting, and sometimes I think we don't open up ourselves in terms of our writing process, and this is extremely candid. So I thank you for sharing with us, and so everybody who's there, all the Spanish authors, now you know. And
Sure, and you can get bad advice too. You can have an
yes,
editor
yes,
that
sure.
doesn't see the same vision as you, and you can compromise. But I think a good editor is a partner that will help the story be better. And and it does often take several times to get it right.
And then we talk about the path to Chrononauta. Do you remember they contact you, or how was the process for the translation?
Yeah, it was great. I remember exactly when I got the email. I was okay, so I was doing this kind of odd freelance gig where I was driving around my Albuquerque, the town that I live in, or the city that I live in, searching for public art. I was part of the public art census where we were trying to document every instance of public art in the county. And so it was a wonderful gig. But I was in the middle of that, and I remember the email came across my phone, like kind of covering up my map that I'm driving along. And I looked at it and I thought, is that real? I don't know. I don't know if I believe that, that they want to translate it. But I pulled over to the side and I stopped and I read the email. And the Catalan translator, or the Catalan publisher, was someone that I actually had done an interview with about a Solarpunk short story or something like that in a Spanish magazine. And so I thought, oh, okay, I recognize this name. There's a personal connection. And so, I asked for some more questions and I looked over the contract, but it's been a wonderful experience overall. And just very easy. I got some questions from the translator about, what exactly do you mean with this word, or
Yeah.
or did you mean to repeat this sentence, or things like that. And that was great. And I absolutely adore the cover
Yeah.
on the Spanish edition.
It's very cool.
I think, yeah. So anyway,
Cheers up.
It's been really neat.
Cheers up for Chrononauta. And so can you share with us what are you working on right now, or is it super secret?
I am working on another climate fiction story that's a sort of science fiction time loop, where the character keeps waking up on the same day over and over. But it's tied into fracking
Okay.
and the earthquakes that fracking can cause. And so that's a project that I have. I'm just on the first draft of that. Who knows if anything will ever come of it, but I hope so. And then I'm working on a fantasy novel as well. So I'm mostly focusing on longer works, although I do have some short stories coming out soon. There's one in an anthology called Bright Green Futures that's coming out just in April of this year. But in terms of what I'm writing, it's mostly longer works right now.
Bueno, we hope that we are going to read them in English, in Spanish, whatever, but we hope that we can all, enjoy them. And so I just have 2 short questions coming up. But before those very short ones, I wanted to ask you about if anybody wants to learn more about Solarpunk as the movement you describe, is there any resources that you would recommend?
Yes. So the anthology I just mentioned, Bright Green Futures, the editor of that has a sort of Solarpunk starter guide on her website, and this is Susan K. Quinn. And the Bright Green Futures is a podcast. So if you find that podcast, you can find her website, and that's a good resource. And then Mary Woodbury, dragonfly.eco, has a good repository of climate fiction and solarpunk resources on that website as well.
Well, thank you. We will take notes from them. And so if I ask you, who would you like to see in LIBRISIMO if you could choose someone? But it has to be alive. That's the thing.
Sure. I know tons of amazing writers. Hernan Bernardo is a Brazilian writer that does solarpunk. I'm sure he would be amazing. Well, another one is Hugo Moreno. He's a Mexican-American author, and he has a book that's coming out that's a translation of his he wrote in Spanish first, and we have the English translation coming out soon, Where the North Ends. And so he might be a good guest because he's writing in Spanish and English.
And the last question I wanted to ask you is about a book, the last book that you read that you were crazy about and that you would recommend.
Oh, good.
Because we're building this little library of titles from the people that are visiting us.
Good question. As soon as you ask me that, I forget every book I've ever read. I think the one that I read recently that I really enjoyed was The World We Make by N.K. Jemisin. So it's The City We Became and The World We Make. These are this is a duology by N.K. Jemisin, and it's about avatars of cities. So it takes place in New York City, and each of the boroughs of New York City sort of comes to life as a person, or is embodied by a person. But then there's a cosmic force that is trying to stop cities from becoming avatars, things like that. So yeah, that was one that really, really blew me away.
Yeah, good choice. I hope that maybe one day she can even stop by LIBRISIMO to talk about this or another book. But anyhow, I wanted to thank you so much for coming into LIBRISIMO. I hope that you will come in the future again, that our paths will cross. And I wanted to ask everybody to read Otra Vida. It's a very interesting story. If you are not familiar with solarpunk, you're going to be blown away. It's very, very interesting. And I think those ideas are very something more optimistic than the dark cyberpunk or dystopias that we're used to, are very refreshing and something to make us reflect and think. So thank you so much again, and see you soon.
Thank you.